answer over the next minute or two, and we'll share those responses once we get started.
While you're taking a look at this survey, today's session is co-hosted by Hive Talent Acquisition Firm and Weiser Consulting. Hive is a human resources and recruiting consulting firm in Sandy Springs, Georgia, for those of you who aren't in Georgia. We are woman-owned, Black-owned, minority-owned, and a government contractor with a specialty in the transportation engineering arena, targeting small to medium-sized companies with no internal human resources or legal team yet. We offer recruiting, HR consulting, and an intern program called the Swarm Society. Please, everyone, go ahead and fill in the pulse test poll that popped up in front of you, and go ahead and submit that, and we will get to those responses soon. Let me also go ahead, while you're doing that, and introduce today's speaker. This is Jay Weiser, and he's the principal and founder of Weiser Consulting. He's known for being a catalyst for change, an executive level consultant and strategy coach. He has over 20 years of experience serving public and private companies across multiple industries, including financial services, life sciences, and retail, and key functions including finance, HR, and IT. Jay mobilizes, guides, and enables middle market and Forbes 500 companies and their leaders to uncover, unlock, and unleash growth potential and hidden value in their organizations. Doing so, he helps clients move and improve performance and increase their odds of future success, especially in disruptive and uncertain times. Jay, you're up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. I want to welcome everybody here. So if we can just, excuse me, pop up the survey responses, get a feel for what everyone's had to say so far. So let's see. Well, this is somewhat encouraging, asking about, are you or have you become more comfortable with uncertainty and disruptiveness? Almost 2/3 of you look like you've grown into 2020. So that's good, because obviously uncertainty and disruptiveness is not going away. And we're seeing similar numbers about your companies getting more and more comfortable. And same thing looking out 2 to 5 years. So this is good. My guess is if I was to ask this question 6 months ago, the answers would be very, very different. So let's jump into the presentation. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. Get one other thing open. There we go. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where people are. I've been dying to say that ever since Good Morning Vietnam. 2020 has been a very interesting year, and not just because of COVID. Clearly, COVID has been a big factor and a big force that has really, impacted the world over. But we've also had economic issues, unemployment issues, political issues, a number of different things. But as you think about it, really since March, the road ahead has looked like this slide. We see some light far off in the distance, but up close, it's like we're driving into a fog. We don't know what's coming next. We see things that we think look like beginnings of solutions. Thankfully, the vaccine, but we also know we're diving into a darker part of this with the rise of COVID and all the things that are going on right now. But the thing to remember is that disruptions and uncertainty are not new. If we think back over the last 20 years, there have been disruptions and uncertainty all along the way. Starting with 9/11 and the impact that had on travel, the impact that had on business, on the economy, how we looked at the world. If you think about online shopping and Amazon and how that's changed retail, we all have smartphones now. and you think about the computing power and what you can do with your smartphones and just that whole idea of mobility, social media, the rise and importance of social responsibility, again, not new, but that's been amplified over the past year. So change and disruption is not new, but I think what's different and what we've seen certainly over the last 10, 12 months is that it's now coming at us from multiple dimensions. And not only that, it's occurring at an accelerating pace. It's coming at us faster and faster. And what we're learning in most cases, I think in a lot of our businesses, if we think about a lot of our lives, is that business as usual, the way we did things pre-COVID or earlier, does not work in today's environment. We can't count on what we did before working. And being able to shift, being able to change is essential to navigating those disruptions and uncertainty. So as we think about what we're going to cover today, there are really four parts of the presentation. First, we're going to talk about that disruption and uncertainty. What's going on in our environment? What are the different forces? In keeping in mind that we're not just looking at how things look today, but how will things look or how could things look in the future? Because we have to factor that future thinking in to how we do our planning and how we prepare for the future. And we're going to define the challenges. What are some of the challenges we face because of the context we're in, the industries we're in, and really thinking about what is the case for change? How do we get our organizations to mobilize and recognize some of the changes that are taking place and prepare differently, to look at the future differently? And it's encouraging to see, again, from the survey, that almost 2/3 of you are saying, we're taking those things into account. Our companies are looking at that. And thirdly, we want to introduce a new process that I think can help us navigate this, and that's uncover, unlock, and unleash. It's an approach that I've developed over the last couple of months that I want to share. And then lastly, we're going to talk about next steps. How do we take this information? What can we do going forward? What kind of resources are available to you? So one of my favorite phrases is context matters. So think about that in terms of what's going on in the world around us. And if we think about inside the tan circle, that's really taking a company or a firm-centric view. Within our companies, if you think about, there are three big bucket components. One is strategy. Where are we going? Where are we going to play? What do we want to sell? What's our value proposition? Second is organization, and looking at structure, how decisions are made, how the organizational system operates, how do people communicate and share information? And thirdly is operations. Now, I think what's important when you look at this, and this is intentionally drawn this way, and that is what happens in these overlap sections is really where value gets created. How the organization begins to adapt and work with strategy, how it's communicated in the organization, how decisions are made. If you think about strategy and operations, how do we operationalize that strategy? What initiatives and projects do we have underway? Do we select? Do we stop to actually implement strategy? And when you look at organization and operations, is how do we manage day to day? How do we hire? How do we acquire talent? So really all those pieces coming together is essential. Now, as I said, context matters. We are not working in a vacuum. We have a number of forces that are coming into play that are affecting our businesses. Now, some of these will look very familiar. Thinking about when we do strategic planning, we think about customers. We think about our competition. Now, we should also be thinking about what's happening in the technology space and how's that going to impact our business. Obviously, if you're like in the newspaper business, the way it is now is very different than what it was 20 years ago. If you're in the automotive dealership business, how you sell a car is very different. Looking at resources, the availability of capital, politically what's going on in the economy. And I think this idea of ecosystem might be a new idea for some, but our companies, our businesses operate in an ecosystem. So, that ecosystem, let's just use an automotive dealership. In that ecosystem, it's my customers, my competitors, the manufacturers who are my suppliers, partners who I work with, whether, could be a partner collision repair service that I work with. It could be different vendors. It could be different finance companies. So all that is part of that ecosystem. So you have to look at that as well. Now, I'd say typically, folks are looking at these things annually, hopefully, if not annually, then maybe every couple of years. And given the amount of change, I think that needs to be done more often. And it's not just looking at these forces individually, but it's looking at them collectively. Now, added to that, we have disruptions. So if we think actually, over the last year, COVID has been a humongous disruption. And it wasn't something that we expected. Now, it might have been something we should have known about or thought about, but by and large, we didn't see it coming, and the majority of companies were not prepared. Social justice is something that's really come to the forefront, over the last year. Again, not something new, but given some of the events like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, things around gender equality, in the call for greater diversity and inclusion, really is come to the top of the agenda for many companies, and certainly for many of us in the country. The war for talent and unemployment was very low right before COVID, and hopefully we'll get back to that. But there was a war for how do you get the best people? And not just the best people for today, but the best people going forward into the future. And, we have question marks. What's going to be the next disruption? It's going to be another pandemic. Is something going to happen economically? You think about what's going on globally. And I think the key here is not just to think about what's happening today, but context matters going forward. So as you think about what your operating environment is going to look like, you have to consider what are different possibilities. So if you go out a year or two and you say, well, what would happen if, say, for example, unemployment stays very high and travel is, people are not going out and traveling. So what implications does that have if you're a meeting planner, if you're a hotel, if you're doing, arranging conference businesses? So you have to think about, what happens in different situations. Now, you can't do that for everything, but it's helpful to look at different scenarios. And it's also recognizing this is a living system. So what I'd like to do now is, open this back up to the group. We're going to ask a couple of questions. The first one is, what disruptions and uncertainties are you and your organization likely to face in the next few years? So if you would type your answers into the chat function, we'll give you a minute or two to do that, and then I'll ask Dana to share that information with me. So let's take a minute to do that and think about what's happening in your own organization, in your own world.
So I'm getting some private messages. Thank you all. Please feel confident to share what's going on. This is interactive. David Ellen, so kind. Uncertainties, recovery from global pandemic, community, supply chains, and pricing. I'm seeing a lot of concern regarding finances for small to medium-sized businesses where it was never an issue before, but it certainly is now. I'm also seeing a lot of concern regarding people's current employee base, hirings, firings, furloughs, et cetera, how that's going to affect their employees, and in turn, how that's going to affect their business. Great job, everybody. Please keep them coming. Teresa Page, low enrollment. I believe that's an academic, perhaps, if you want to clarify on that, but I think that's what that is from an academic standpoint. Thank you so much for sharing. Donna Slott, realtors were designated as essential workers and I coach online, she said, so it's not a huge deal for her business per se. She's clearly an advocate already of online resources and online platforms. The issues that she's seen are slow mail related, which does make sense. Rebecca Breezy, pardon me if I butchered that. Thank you for your patience. Uncertainty about cash flow versus accounting, another good one regarding finances. Contract situations and long-term commitments, opportunities about hiring potential and productivity. Excellent share. Thank you. Becky Alvis, for us, lead generation has always been done through trade shows. So that's that face-to-face again. How many of you are involved in trade shows and conferences that are face-to-face that are no longer now? Has that affected your business? Thank you for sharing. Diane Moog, I apologize. Diane M, thank you so much. Many jobs not coming back due to digital transition. And that's huge. Thank you for sharing. And Justin M, hiring new candidates that are in a competitive space will be challenging. You're absolutely right, sir. So we've got a lot of it for you. Oh, and then a good one from Bruce, speed of technology, social and economic changes. Thank you guys so much.
So clearly, there's no shortage of disruption and uncertainty that's coming up over the next, not just 12 months, but next 2 to 3 years. These are all interacting. They're things that are facing how our businesses operate. Supply chain, I think it's a great one that's been raised, and the fact of how efficient businesses have been running. The focus on productivity and efficiency very often caused us to sacrifice resiliency. How we look at our supply chain going forward needs to be different from what it was before. Suppliers that you thought you could rely on are running into the same problems that each of your businesses are running into. So do you need to look at potentially having different relationships, forming partnerships with certain suppliers? Talking about low enrollment, I'm assuming that one's about education and having a son in college. When education was forced to go online, actually I having a teacher, my wife's a public school educator. In the whole idea of being not just enrollment, but engagement in online classes. And, are people getting their money's worth if their children are in private schools, whether that be at a university level or at a high school level? The quality of education. And in some cases, educators in schools have really stepped up and have work to maintain that quality, and in other cases, not so well. This idea of what's an essential worker and, how do we take care of these people, is very important. How are they compensated? How are they protected in this environment? The whole idea of how we sell, there was mention of trade shows, and being able to meet face to face for a sales meeting, and now we're doing Zoom calls like we're doing right now. And how do you make up for not being able to have that personal touch? And it was interesting. There was a study, company called Board of Innovation. So they've got a website, boardofinnovation.com, and they talked about the low touch economy. And I had an interesting thought that low touch, it doesn't have to be low touch, because, the way we're talking to each other now, it can have that feeling of high touch, can have that feeling of connection. You don't just need to think about it in terms of physical touch, but it's more about emotional touch. So these are all great. We want to pose a second question, and that is, what are some future scenarios that your organization should take into consideration? So let me just define what I mean when I say scenarios. I consider a scenario a set of conditions. So for example, if I'm a residential home builder, a scenario might be interest rates stay low and consumer air travel stays suppressed. Now, if something like that happens and I'm a builder, one thing I might want to consider is, do I start to think about building vacation homes that are close to metropolitan areas, that are within driving distance? Because I know people aren't necessarily going to fly. So sometimes disruptions create opportunities. So it's thinking through those scenarios. So let me pause there and give you a minute or two to go back into chat. And if you can identify your industry that you're in a scenario that you think should be considered, and we'll give you a minute to do that.
And while you guys are doing that, there was one great comment that I wanted to say last minute from Jerry Scherer. The availability of capital, so office space going the way of Amazon's effect on malls due to working from home. And I think working from home has definitely created some interesting future scenario thought processes. So I'm looking forward to these coming through. One in particular for Hive, while you guys are getting these into the chats, for me personally and for Hive, is video conferencing, working from home, taking over the travel aspects of even just around greater metro Atlanta. The handshake has gone the way of the buffalo. How do you guys feel about that? Personally, I've been greeting people with Wakanda forever, right? I'm not shaking hands these days. So tell us what you're doing. We'd love to know. So seeing a lot of private messages to myself. Thank you guys for sharing. I won't call your names out. I know you don't like that. So Jay, we're seeing a lot of stuff about work from home, about lack of travel to keep safety, the differences in businesses holding masks as a requirement as opposed to not. These are all really great comments. Thank you.
What was the last one, Dana? If you can just repeat that.
The differences between businesses requiring masks and not requiring them.
I mean, these are all good things. So, for example, this idea of work from home, and I mentioned this idea of, not having travel. That might be one scenario, and that affects a number of industries. If you're in the hotel business and you're in the conference business, what might you do if people are going to be, quote unquote, attending conferences from home? And I've actually attended some of these. They have breakout rooms. They have places that you can network. Companies have adapted. And it really goes back, if you go back to, Kodak is an old example. When digital photography came in, it was a recognition that, people didn't care about film. They cared about the memory. They cared about the picture. And there are different ways to deliver that. And that's really the same thing, as we look at that, scenario. So I was thinking about that. So I want to jump in and just talk a little bit about how interrelated and interconnected some of these things are. So first, if we think about COVID, somebody raised mentioned about wearing a mask. And we know about social distancing. So that's one force that we're dealing with. A second force we're dealing with is social justice, diversity, and inclusion. So think about how those forces interact. So if we tie this together, you think about social distancing. That's led to no travel. Now, I don't know how many of you have flown, but I did back in November, I did back in June. And the flights were empty. They cleared the middle seats, but there's still airports are empty. I know in Hartsfield, half of the sea terminal is still closed. It's also about working from home. So that changes things. Now, if you add in this whole idea about social justice and diversity and inclusion, how do you factor that into working from home? You might have employees who are uncomfortable because now all of a sudden you see what their homes look like. And people have different levels of wealth, have different capabilities. They might have kids running around at home. All that's visible now. And how do leaders in the workforce take that into account? And that leads to, how do companies communicate? How do they meet? So now meetings are virtual. How do you as a leader in a virtual meeting make sure that you're being inclusive, that you are engaging a wide variety of opinions, making sure people feel included? And that's very important. So if you think about how those things have come together, two forces interacting, and then if you take the idea of virtual meetings, that had impact. Zoom has had to step up and change how they do telecommunications. Collaborative tools for online meetings have greatly advanced and are more widely used. So as you look at this, you really have to look at this as a system. You have to look at it in totality. You can't look at pieces in isolation. So we're now going to take a quick survey again. So we want to have you rank whether or not these statements are true or false for your company. First, we expect more disruptiveness and uncertainty than the past. During disruptions, our performance and organizational climate tends to suffer. The risks to and in our business are increasing. Or we have often been surprised and unprepared when disruptions occur. And fifth, business as usual will solve the challenges we face. So we can open up that survey, take a minute or two to answer those 5 questions. And then we'll take a look at that, talk a little bit about what we're seeing, and move forward from there. So I want to thank everybody for their participation. This has been great.
We really appreciate your responsiveness and support today, everyone. Thank you so much. So a couple comments that have come through while you guys are filling out the survey. Donna mentioned that she's not traveling and that she does miss it, but she'll take it over getting the virus. Thank you for that. 2 clients of hers actually flew and both got it. And I'm curious how many people were actually even on those planes and how many people were in the airport at that time. So many factors to look at. Thank you for sharing, Donna.
All right, so assuming most folks have had a chance to answer the survey, or we can pop up the results, that would be great. Okay, so this is good. Folks are very realistic here that there's going to be more disruptiveness and uncertainty. As they say, the only certainty we have is uncertainty. In this idea that disruptions impact our performance and organizational climate. So the question is, how do we make our companies more resilient? And we'll talk about that. The risks to our business are increasing. And this idea of resiliency and preparedness can actually act as an antidote to the risks that are coming. We've often been surprised and unprepared. So that's, 50-50. That's something we want to get better at, because when we're surprised and unprepared, we tend to react. We don't necessarily make the best decisions under crisis and under that stress. Business as usual will solve the challenges we face. So 75% of you said that statement is false. Now, some of you said it might, and that might be true for some industries, but I would challenge you to say, what makes you think that? And say, are those assumptions realistic? I want to pop up one last survey question. And that survey question is really asking, now this is how you answered it. And the question is, would the leadership in your organization agree with this? So let's take 30 seconds to answer that. And let's see if there's a difference between what you think your view is and what you think your leadership team's view is.
Donna, so cute. Thank you for sharing. She said she's the leader, so she agrees with herself. That's important. And then Jerry Scherer said that we should all remember Donald Rumsfeld's quote about known unknowns, or known knowns, excuse me, I screwed that up. Known knowns. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, that's great. It helps if you're a leader, if you're actually aligned with your own thinking. Otherwise, there's medication for that. All right, let's see the results. So you do think leadership would agree. Now, I'm not sure how many of us here are leaders. That's good. Now, I also suspect in some cases, if we had a lot of frontline folks, and maybe a few months back, frontline folks were seeing these issues in real time up front. And a lot of times leadership was not. So that communication between the frontline and leadership and listening to the folks who are interacting with your customers is essential. So now the question is, so now what? What do we do? So if we think about where we are in the reality, for many, if not most companies, the future is going to continue to be disruptive and uncertain. And you guys, have almost universally agreed with that. The recognition that despite past successes, how well we've done in the past, that we're going to be challenged in this environment, and not just today, but going forward. In this idea, we're going to need to see, think, and do differently. We need to change how we look at the world. We need to look at it from different perspectives. We need to think in different ways. So we might have, a perspective that command and control is the way things should work, because that's the way you were brought up. That's the way you were trained. It was important to have control. But in a disruptive environment, that might not be the best way to go, because you want folks to be flexible. You want them to be responsive. And, this phrase, the thinking that got you into a situation is unlikely to be the thinking that gets you out of it. And my second favorite one is, the system you're in, the way your business is run, is perfectly designed to deliver the results you're getting. But if you want different results, you have to change the system. And we're seeing that, what we have done isn't enough. So, there is a clear case for change. And, I think we're all feeling that. And if we're not, we're going to soon, because those who don't, we're not going to be around for very long. We're seeing business failures. We're seeing companies that can't keep up. So where do you start? There we go. So I want to talk about a new approach. And this is uncover, unlock, and unleash. So let me just talk about each of those steps. Bear with me for a minute. All right, so uncover. So when we think about uncover, it's really looking at what are the opportunities around us. And some of these might look like challenges, but how do we change them to opportunities? What information are we seeing about the environment in terms of what's happening around us, not just in our companies, but in the world around us, and the different forces? What insights can we take away from that? And as we look forward, and what foresight do we have? What possible futures, plausible futures are out there that we need to think about? Now, as we do that, we have to unlock the organization. There are things that we currently do today that are holding us back. Maybe how we make decisions, maybe how we communicate, maybe how we share information. So there's things within our organizations that are holding us back from growing, from reaching our full potential. And the third part is unleash. So how do you let the organization run with what they now know? You've put the changes in place. The organization has to implement, has to act. It's time to deliver value, achieve results faster. And it's important that we learn and adapt. So this isn't a one-time thing that we just uncover, unlock, unleash once. It's something that we need to be doing almost on a continual basis. For some businesses, it might mean revisiting things quarterly. And for other businesses, it also means, excuse me, it also means, maybe it's monthly. And that's really going to depend on the velocity of your business. Now, I want to talk about how does this apply realistically. So when you think about uncover, that's really looking at this world around us. That's one, in terms of the environment. Two, what's going on inside our company and how are these different intersections working? Three is looking at how is this not just happening now, but what's likely and plausible to happen in the future in some different scenarios. So that's really uncover, looks at this whole picture, not just now, but in the future. When you think about unlock, that's happening here. This is where we have control within our companies. We can look at these intersections and improve. If you think about strategy and organization, how do we have better alignment and better coordination? How do we improve communications in our organization so people understand what the strategy is and they understand their role in it? When you look at strategy and operations, how do we make sure that we're considering and making the right decisions about the right projects and initiatives? And unlock also happens here because, again, this is an area where we have control. So again, it's that continuous process. So let's move forward and say, is your company ready to shift to succeed? So a couple of things to think about as you look at this within your company. Are we uncomfortable, if at all, with where we are and where our organization is heading? And how uncomfortable are we? And how, this applies not just to us, but our leadership, or if you happen to be both. Is it urgent and important for us to start changing? Is this something we have to do now? And are we ready and able to start changing now? Do we have the capabilities? Do we have the leadership? Do we understand why? Now, as you think about this, I suspect there are some that would answer no. Maybe we're not uncomfortable. We think things are fine. Maybe it's because we've adapted and that's great. Maybe it's because, we have blinders on and we're not fully appreciating the impact. Maybe we think that things are going to go back to normal. Things are going to go back to what they were a year ago before all this happened. That's not very likely. Now, if you're in that place, we can help you because I think it's important to understand the costs and risks of not acting and helping you build the case for change. Having a discussion, with someone like myself, there are other consultants out there, and challenging some of those underlying assumptions that, you think you're comfortable for certain reasons. Well, are those reasons true? Are they valid? Now, if you answered yes, we are uncomfortable, it is urgent. Uh, a lot of you can start doing some things on your own. But talking with a lot of leaders that I've done over the last 6 to 9 months, I'm hearing we're busy, we're fighting fires, we don't have time. And that's where having an outside consultant, having an advisor, having someone like myself who's helped companies with this before, is acting as a force multiplier, leveraging leadership's time, helping build the capabilities to move forward. And that makes things happen faster. You get results sooner. And I think what's most important is that you build the capabilities to increase your odds of future success. This is not just what you do now, but it's how you prepare and get ready for the things that are likely or could happen in the future. So when we think about next steps, I think it's important to act now. We're facing, a steep uphill climb, and the world's going to be different. And the sooner we figure this out, and the sooner we prepare and get ready, the better we will be. So the first thing, is schedule a complimentary 45-minute discovery call with me. You click on the link there, and we'll share that afterwards as well. That will take you to my contact page on my site. What will we do during that 45-minute call? We're going to explore your situation. It's the most important thing for me and for you is to fully understand what's happening. Because if you can't define the problem, if you don't understand the problem, it's impossible to solve it. And during that discussion, I'll share some recommended next steps, and we'll explore, how and if we can help. Can't do it in every situation. I think, that's a discussion that we need to have. The second thing is to register for our upcoming 3-part Uncover, Unlock, Unleash webinar series. And in that series, each session will focus on one step, how it links to the next, talk about it, but also more importantly, actionable guidance. How do you do this inside your organization? What are the questions you need to ask? Who should be involved? The sessions will start in the middle of January, roughly around January, I think 19th was the date I was thinking about. And the sessions will occur about every 2 weeks. So that'll take us into the middle of February. Every participant will get a 60-minute coaching call as part of the series to talk about one of these or all of these steps in your company, how you get started, what you can do, how do you overcome resistance. Encourage you to register by the end of the year. And we're going to limit this. I think 30 is a good number because we want this to be interactive. I want you to be able to talk about what's happening in your own business. Lastly, you can request a copy of today's presentation and click on the link again. That'll take you to our contact page. Since the session is being recorded, this will also be posted. We'll be sending that information out to all the attendees, so that way, if you want to share this information with your own organizations, have a colleague watch this or a senior leader, that will be available. Now, all of these options are free. Now, the question is, will you invest your time? Because if you'll invest your time, I'll invest mine. So let me stop there. I know I've been talking a bit. We want to make sure we leave time for questions. And I know Dana also wants to, tell us again a little bit about Hive and how that fits, into what we've talked about and how Hive can help you prepare for the future as well.
Thanks so much, Jay. You did so great. This was wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate you being here.